Welcome back to the Heart Sutra channel, where we explore books and wisdom and knowledge, and we think about how to apply those insights to our lives today. We're continuing our journey through the Bhagavad Gita, and today we're tackling Chapter 8, Attaining the Supreme. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you don't miss any of our future episodes.
Looking forward to it.
In this series, we're taking a deep dive into the Bhagavad Gita, exploring its timeless wisdom, one chapter at a time. As you know, the Gita builds upon itself beautifully, each chapter shedding light on the others. Last time, we explored the concept of action in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance, a theme that really resonated with many of you. Today, Chapter 8 takes us even deeper, grappling with profound questions about the soul, the cycle of birth and death, and ultimately the paths to liberation.
Yeah, this one is really a fascinating chapter.
Right from the introduction to this edition of the Gita, there's an emphasis on presenting Krishna's message in its purest form without any personal interpretations or attempts to, as the text says, banish or kill Krishna. I found that to be such a powerful reminder of approaching these sacred texts with humility and a sincere desire to understand.
Absolutely. It's about letting go of our preconceived notions and allowing the text to speak to us directly. And in Chapter 8, that message is particularly potent. We're delving into the very heart of spiritual inquiry here.
Okay, so let's jump into the chapter itself. It opens with King Duryodhana feeling completely intimidated by the Pandava army. He rushes off to consult his commander, Dronacharya. This scene feels like more than just a military tactic. Is there a deeper message here, something we can all relate to?
Oh, for sure. This scene really struck me as a microcosm of the human experience. We all face moments of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. Duryodhana's response, seeking guidance from someone he perceives as wiser and more experienced, is something we all do in different ways.
So instead of a war room, it's like we're all facing our own personal battlefields, and sometimes we need to seek guidance from mentors or teachers, or even sacred texts like the Bhagavad Gita.
Precisely. And just as Duryodhana's anxiety drives him to seek counsel, our own anxieties and fears can propel us towards spiritual seeking. It's in those moments of vulnerability that we're often most receptive to wisdom.
And speaking of guidance, I love how the text describes Krishna and Arjuna blowing their transcendental conch shells. It paints such a vivid picture. But what's the significance of those conch shells? Is it just a cool battle cry, or is there something more to it?
You know, those conch shells are far more than just instruments of war. They're powerful symbols of divine presence and support. Krishna and Arjuna blowing their conch shells represent the alignment of human action with the divine will.
It's like they're calling in divine support for the battle ahead.
Exactly, and that reminds me of the verse where Krishna tells Arjuna, "You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action." It's about surrendering our ego's desire for control and trusting that we're supported by a greater force.
That's a powerful concept. And it ties in beautifully with the idea of dharma, which is so central to the Gita. We often hear that dharma is more than just duty, but it can be tricky to grasp its deeper meaning. How would you explain dharma to someone who's new to this concept?
Well, dharma is often translated as duty, but it's a much richer concept than that. It's about living in alignment with your true nature, your soul's purpose. Imagine a seed growing into a tree. The seed's dharma is to become a tree to fulfill its inherent potential.
So it's not just about following rules or societal expectations, but rather about understanding our unique gifts and talents and expressing them in service to the world.
Beautifully put. And the Bhagavad Gita is a guidebook for discovering and living in alignment with our dharma, even when it's challenging.
And speaking of challenges, there's a verse in Chapter 8 that really struck me. It says, "The soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in the 5 kinds of air, is situated within the heart, and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities." Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Can you help us make sense of this description of the soul?
Sure. This verse highlights the paradoxical nature of the soul. It's tiny atomic, even yet, its influence permeates our entire being. The image of the soul floating in the 5 kinds of air refers to the 5 pranas, the vital energies that flow through our body. It suggests that the soul, though subtle, animates and enlivens our physical form.
It's like our soul is this radiant spark of consciousness, constantly interacting with our physical body and influencing every aspect of our being.
Exactly. And this concept of the soul's pervasiveness also points to a crucial theme in the Gita: interconnectedness. Just as the soul is connected to every cell in our body, we're all interconnected with each other and the entire cosmos.
It's like that saying, we are all drops in the same ocean. And if we're all connected in this profound way, then our actions, thoughts, and intentions have a ripple effect on the world around us.
Precisely. That's why the Gita emphasizes the importance of action in the mode of goodness. Actions that are performed with selfless intention and a focus on the well-being of all.
And that brings us back to Arjuna's dilemma. He's facing a moral crisis torn between his duty as a warrior and his love for his family and friends on both sides of the battlefield. He even worries about incurring sin by fighting.
This is where the concept of dharma gets really tricky. Arjuna is grappling with the complexities of right action in a situation where there are no easy answers. His internal conflict reflects a universal struggle. How do we reconcile our personal desires and attachments with our higher purpose?
Right, because sometimes living our dharma requires making difficult choices. Choices that may even cause pain or conflict.
Exactly, and that's where seeking guidance from a spiritual teacher or text becomes crucial. The Gita is offering a framework for navigating those difficult choices, for aligning our actions with our highest understanding of truth.
So it's not about blindly following rules, but rather about cultivating the wisdom and discernment to act in a way that's aligned with our true nature and the greater good.
You've got it. And that leads us to one of the most quoted verses in the Gita. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty.
I've heard that verse so many times, but it feels especially relevant in our modern world, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about achieving success and striving for results.
It's a radical message, isn't it? The Gita is essentially saying, focus on the process, not the outcome. Find fulfillment in the doing, not just the achieving. It's a powerful antidote to the anxiety and stress that come from attachment to results.
So instead of constantly chasing external validation or material rewards, it's about finding joy and meaning in the journey itself.
Precisely. It's about cultivating a sense of inner peace and contentment, regardless of external circumstances.
This reminds me of another verse that really stood out to me. He who is without attachment, who does not rejoice when he obtains good, nor lament when he obtains evil, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge.
Powerful words. This verse points to the ultimate goal of spiritual practice, equanimity. It's about cultivating a steady mind, a heart that's not swayed by the ups and downs of life.
That sounds like a truly liberating way to be, but it also feels incredibly challenging. How can we cultivate that kind of inner peace in a world that's full of so much chaos and uncertainty?
The Gita offers a variety of practices and techniques for cultivating equanimity, including meditation, self-reflection, and the cultivation of virtues like patience and compassion. But it all starts with awareness, noticing how our minds react to pleasant and unpleasant experiences without judgment.
So it's about becoming the observer of our thoughts and emotions, rather than being swept away by them.
Exactly. And from that place of awareness, we can begin to make choices that are aligned with our highest aspirations, choices that lead to greater peace and freedom.
Okay, let's talk about time. This chapter delves into the cyclical nature of creation with those fascinating descriptions of the four yugas. What's the significance of these cycles? Are we just destined to repeat the same patterns over and over again?
The concept of the yugas offers a profound perspective on the ebb and flow of life. It suggests that history isn't linear, but rather spiralic. We might experience similar challenges or themes in different lifetimes, but each cycle offers an opportunity for growth and evolution.
So it's not about fatalism, but rather about understanding the larger patterns at play and choosing to consciously evolve with each cycle.
Exactly. And the Gita emphasizes that our actions, thoughts, and intentions influence our journey through these cycles. It's like we're co-creating our reality with each choice we make.
And speaking of choices, this chapter revisits the three modes of action: goodness, passion, and ignorance. I'm still trying to wrap my head around these concepts and how they play out in our everyday lives.
Let's break it down. Imagine you're baking a cake. If you're baking the cake with love and care, wanting to share its deliciousness with others, that's action in the mode of goodness. If you're baking the cake to impress your friends or win a baking competition, that's action in the mode of passion. And if you're baking the cake with expired ingredients and don't really care how it turns out, that's action in the mode of ignorance.
That's a great analogy. So it's not just about the action itself, but the intention and awareness behind it.
Exactly. And the Gita suggests that cultivating action in the mode of goodness leads to greater peace, happiness, and ultimately liberation from the cycle of suffering.
Okay, I think we need to take a quick break here to let all of this wisdom sink in.
Sounds good to me. Welcome back to the Heart Sutra channel. We're unraveling the wisdom of Chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita, Attaining the Supreme, and discovering how its ancient insights can illuminate our modern lives.
We left off talking about the three modes of action: goodness, passion, and ignorance, and how those intentions shape our experiences. Chapter 8 also dives into the power of the mind and the challenge of controlling our senses, something I think we can all relate to. There's this verse that says, "Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is a yogi and is happy in this world." It seems to emphasize self-control as a key to liberation. But what does that look like in a practical sense? Do we have to renounce all worldly pleasures to find true happiness?
That's a question that's puzzled spiritual seekers for centuries. The Gita doesn't advocate for extreme austerity or complete withdrawal from the world. It's not about suppressing our desires, but understanding their nature.
So instead of seeing desires as the enemy, it's about learning to work with them skillfully.
Exactly. Think of it like training a wild horse. You don't break its spirit, you learn to guide its energy. The Gita uses the term Goswami or Swami to describe someone who has mastered self-control, someone who is no longer a slave to their desires.
That makes sense. It's about becoming the master of our inner world rather than being ruled by our impulses.
Precisely. True happiness doesn't come from chasing fleeting pleasures. It arises from connecting with our true self, the soul, which is beyond the grasp of those external distractions.
So how do we make that shift? How do we cultivate that deeper connection with our true self in the midst of a world that's constantly bombarding us with temptations?
Well, the Gita points to several practices, including meditation, self-reflection, and seeking guidance from a spiritual teacher or text. But it all begins with cultivating self-awareness, noticing our desires without judgment, observing the patterns of our mind.
This reminds me of another verse that speaks directly to this inner struggle. It says, "Thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust." This insatiable enemy known as lust, that's pretty strong language.
It highlights the power of desire, particularly lust, to distract us from our spiritual path. The Gita acknowledges this inner battle between our lower self driven by instinctual desires and our higher self connected to our soul's aspirations.
So it's about learning to discern between those two voices within us and consciously choosing to align ourselves with our higher aspirations.
Exactly. And it requires ongoing effort, a kind of spiritual strength that's cultivated through practice and self-awareness.
That makes me think of all the modern solutions we have to help manage our attention and focus. Mindfulness apps, digital detoxes, even productivity techniques. Could these be seen as modern tools for strengthening our higher selves?
Absolutely. While the Gita was written centuries ago, its wisdom remains incredibly relevant today. These modern tools can be valuable allies in our quest for self-mastery.
It's like using technology to support our spiritual growth rather than letting it control us.
Precisely. And this brings us to the concept of renunciation, a key theme in Chapter 8. The verse states, "A person is said to have attained to yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities."
Renunciation often has this image of asceticism, of giving up all worldly possessions and retreating to a cave. But is that what the Gita is advocating?
Not necessarily. The Gita's emphasis on renunciation is about shifting our internal relationship to the world, not necessarily changing our external circumstances. It's about letting go of attachment to the fruits of our actions and recognizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from external acquisitions or achievements.
So it's more about an inner shift in perspective than an outward change in lifestyle.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our true self, the soul, is already complete and whole. It doesn't need anything from the external world to be happy.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the minimalist movement, or people who are intentionally simplifying their lives to focus on what truly matters. Could these be seen as modern expressions of renunciation?
Absolutely. They're choosing to prioritize inner fulfillment over external accumulation.
And in a world that's constantly pushing us to consume more, acquire more, achieve more, that's a radical act.
It is. And it speaks to the timelessness of the Gita's teachings.
Now, the text goes on to describe two paths to liberation, one that focuses on the unmanifest, and another that emphasizes devotion to Krishna. What's the difference between these two paths, and why does Krishna seem to favor the path of devotion?
The path of the unmanifest refers to a more impersonal approach to spiritual realization, seeking to merge with the cosmic consciousness without necessarily acknowledging a personal God. The Gita suggests that this path is more challenging and less suited for the current age.
So it's like trying to reach the summit of a mountain without a guide or a map?
That's a good analogy. Whereas the path of bhakti yoga, devotion to Krishna, is like having a loving guide who's showing you the way.
And Krishna offers a pretty compelling invitation to follow this path, he says. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me and being devoted to me without deviation, engaged in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. That sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It is. And it speaks to the heart of bhakti yoga, which is about cultivating a loving relationship with the divine. It's about surrendering our ego's desire for control and trusting in a higher power.
So it is not about blind faith, but rather about developing a deep personal connection with the divine.
Exactly. And that connection can express itself in many forms: chanting prayer meditations, selfless service, or simply living our lives with a heart full of love and gratitude.
Now, this chapter also describes some specific practices for spiritual advancement, including holding the body erect, staring at the tip of the nose, and being completely free from sex life. This last part in particular might raise some eyebrows. Is celibacy a prerequisite for spiritual enlightenment?
It's important to remember that the Gita was written in a specific cultural context, and some of its teachings might need to be adapted to our modern lives. While celibacy may be a beneficial practice for some, it's not a requirement for everyone.
So it's not about denying our sexuality, but rather about understanding how our desires and attachments can distract us from our spiritual path.
Precisely. It's about finding a balance that supports our spiritual growth without denying our humanity.
And this brings us to one of the most dramatic scenes in the Gita Arjuna's vision of Krishna's universal form. It says, "O Lord of the universe, I see in your universal body many, many forms. Bellies, mouths, eyes expanded without limit. There is no end, there is no beginning, and there is no middle to all this." That sounds like an incredibly intense experience. What's the significance of this vision?
This vision represents a pivotal moment in Arjuna's spiritual journey. It shatters his limited ego-based perception of reality and reveals the awe-inspiring vastness and power of the divine.
It's like he's getting a glimpse of the infinite nature of reality, the interconnectedness of all things.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that our human minds can't fully grasp the true nature of the divine. Even our greatest conceptions of God are likely to fall short.
That's a humbling thought.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, is it possible for ordinary people like us to have these kinds of profound spiritual experiences?
The Gita suggests that these experiences are available to anyone who cultivates sincere devotion and practices spiritual disciplines with dedication. It's not about being special or chosen, but about aligning our hearts and minds with the divine.
And that leads us to another powerful statement from Krishna, where he describes himself as the source of everything. "O conqueror of wealth, there is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread." So is Krishna saying he's the only God and all other deities are false?
The Gita acknowledges the existence of various demigods and deities, recognizing that different paths can lead to the same ultimate reality.
So it's not about rejecting other spiritual traditions, but understanding that they all point to the same source, the same divine essence.
Exactly. Krishna is simply emphasizing that he is the source of all those paths, the ground of being from which everything emanates.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. All these diverse spiritual expressions are like different facets of the same jewel, each reflecting a different aspect of the divine light.
That's a wonderful analogy.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Chapter 8, and I feel like we've covered so much ground already. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on to the final part of this episode?
Just a reminder that the Bhagavad Gita is a living text. Its wisdom unfolds gradually as we continue to study, reflect, and apply its teachings to our lives.
Welcome back to the Heart Sutra channel. We're wrapping up our exploration of Chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita, Attaining the Supreme. It's been an incredible journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from the nature of the soul to the paths to liberation. Chapter 8 truly offers a profound roadmap for navigating the complexities of life and realizing our true potential.
And one of the things that keeps striking me throughout this chapter is the emphasis on inner transformation rather than external achievements. It's not about what we acquire or accomplish in the world, but about the state of our being.
Exactly. The Gita consistently reminds us that true happiness and fulfillment are not found in external circumstances, but in the cultivation of inner peace, wisdom, and self-mastery.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final takeaway from Chapter 8, something that really resonated with you, something our listeners can ponder as they continue their own exploration of the Gita.
Let me see. What truly stood out to me is the Gita's invitation to question our assumptions and challenge our habitual ways of thinking. Take, for example, the concept of renunciation. We often associate it with deprivation, with giving up things we enjoy. But the Gita reframes renunciation as a path to freedom.
So instead of seeing it as a sacrifice, we can view it as a liberation from the suffering that arises from clinging to impermanent things.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that true security and fulfillment are found not in material possessions or external validation, but in our connection to something greater than ourselves.
And that reminds me of the beautiful verse where Krishna describes himself as the thread upon which all pearls are strung. It suggests that everything in the universe is interconnected, woven together by a divine force.
That's a beautiful image, and it underscores the interconnectedness of all beings. Our actions, thoughts, and intentions have a ripple effect influencing the world around us. It's a call to live with awareness and compassion, recognizing our interconnectedness with all of creation.
So in a sense, Chapter 8 is not just about personal liberation, but also about contributing to the well-being of the world.
Exactly. By cultivating inner peace and wisdom, we naturally become a source of peace and wisdom for others.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of its timeless wisdom and how it applies to our lives today.
Me too.
And remember, the Heart Sutra channel is here to support your exploration of wisdom and knowledge. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with anyone who might find it valuable. We appreciate your support.
Thanks for listening, everyone.